Imagine being dragged into a 30-inch pipeline in a whirlwind of water, equipment, and men surging beneath the surface in the darkness, without completely grasping what was occurring to you. Holding your lungs tight, with the conviction that you would suffocate within seconds. Only one of the 5 divers pulled into the conduit that day would survive to recount what transpired. A GoPro action camera fastened to the divers' suits captured both footage and sound of what happened next. What it discloses is horrifying. This is the deadly collapse of the Paria diving tragedy. February 25, 2022 commenced as an ordinary shift for the crew of LMCS diving at Pointe-à-Pierre. They were assigned to execute servicing duties on a conduit for Paria Fuel, a state-owned petroleum corporation in Trinidad and Tobago. As seasoned divers, Kazim Cozy Ali Jr., Yusuf Henry, Faisal Kurban, Rishi Nagasar, and Chris Budram were all familiar with normal operational procedure. On this occasion, they were instructed to operate on a section of pipeline not presently functioning, which is a U-shaped conduit between the berth where a tanker would moor to discharge its crude, called berth 5, and the point where the crude entered the refinery, referred to as berth 6. For them to complete their assignment for the day, the men initially needed to isolate the conduit from the surrounding seawater, in order to locate the spots that needed repairs. To achieve this, they positioned a specialized, habitat bell over the opening of the pipeline. This step allows the seawater to be forced out down the conduit, creating a dry zone where they could perform their work. The habitat chamber was an 8-foot by 8-foot enclosure mounted above the pipeline. When air is pumped in to force the water out, the workers could stand on the ledge to carry out their operational repairs in the hyperbaric habitat. Inside, the divers could take off their gear, stand on a platform, and employ instruments to accomplish intricate repairs as a team. One crucial duty they must perform was extracting an inflatable stopper at berth 6. This inflatable stopper had been inserted nearly 2 weeks earlier to guide hydrocarbons inside the pipes, and restain the oil content from escaping. The stopper was an airtight seal, clamping firmly against the pressure forcing downward within the habitat chamber. A spanner was fetched to slacken the valve. Kazim Ali handed the tool up to the 4 men already laboring around the conduit, then hauled himself onto the ledge to remove his diving gear. The instant the valve was opened, an overwhelming force swiftly engulfed the working crew. Water surged into the chamber and down into the conduit. In that moment, the overwhelming force pulled the divers and their instruments into a ferocious whirlwind of water surging down the conduit. The men scarcely had time to register what was happening before they were hurled away in a raging maelstrom through the pipe. In that surge of event, it was a profound sheer fortune that they settled from the water into part of the pipe that contained breathable air for breathing. The GoPro camera recorded the crew briefly just moments before they were sucked in and quickly went blank. As you hear their cries in the turmoil, the yells and bewilderment in the blackness, one can only imagine how they were even able to talk. They were actually yelling at each other within this conduit imagined to be full of hydrocarbon. The dreadful irony was that the very air sustaining them to breath was also the cause that triggered the catastrophe, driving the cyclone of water that dragged them in. So how precisely did this occur? The inflatable stopper they were removing was intended to be separating 1,200 barrels of crude oil from the air and seawater surrounding it. Ordinarily, the removal of the stopper would have been just a normal routine, then they proceed with other activities in their schedule. The air pressure from the chamber should normally be pressing down upon a heavy column of crude. The crude would have been settled leveled down and maintaining balance between berths 5 and 6 pipe openings. Just nothing beyond the usual. But unfortunately, they all had no clue that there was significantly less crude inside the conduit than usually assumed, and a pocket of air was trapped beneath the plug through the length of the pipe. As soon as they deflated the stopper, the highly compressed air from the habitat chamber erupted down the passage with explosive momentum, pulling the divers, their gear, and even their scuba cylinders into the 30-inch conduit. Almost as if the habitat chamber was suddenly freed. The seawater savagely surged inside, mingling with the trapped air and entire wreckage. The 5 men were hurled into utter blackness, pounded in the churning flood, frantically struggling for breath. That brief moment of violent rush was like an eternity, but eventually, the torrent surge subsided, and they discovered themselves in a modest bubble of air. Chris Budram, the only survivor, later recounted the unimaginable feeling of what it was like being sucked into an oil conduit like a piece of waste.
Tornado, everything just spinning and beating you up, and it happened so fast, you couldn't react. After that, all I remember, I didn't even remember actually getting pulled in the pipe. I just remember going hurled through the pipe at unbelievable speeds. I couldn't hold my breath no longer. My throat When you're holding your breath for too long, after a while, your body, your lungs just fight. Your airways close, you see a noise. Your body suffering to pull air. An unbelievable nightmare. Your eyes burning. Every time you try to open your eyes, it's burning. You're pitch black, you can't see nothing. Your throat burning. Your ears ringing. Your body sore. And at that point, I tell myself I was gonna die.
He remembered the spinning confusion, the absolute darkness, the stinging in his chest and eyes, and the crushing battle to remain alive. When they briefly grabbed balance, the crew made a quick assessment of where they were, how they were feeling, and if all 5 of them had made it. They started yelling back and forth to locate each other to ascertain if they were all inside the pipe together. It was just so unimaginable, and the gruesome realization was nearly unthinkable for them. Trying to understand their location inside the conduit was much harder than they could imagine. They were drastically destabilized and have no slightest idea how far deep they were trapped inside the oil pipe. This conduit section was 1,200 foot long, as lengthy as 4 football fields. The pipeline contained curvy joints and braces where supports were placed, showcasing changes in height that permitted tiny air cavities to form. As soon as they did their assessment, it became clear to them they were all battered but still living. But because of their individual distorted positioning, none could which direction would lead them to berth 6. Despite fractured bones, damaged organs, and oil searing their eyes and throats amidst the chaos, the divers briefly discussed and resolved to cling together and edge forward as a unit toward one side. Every surface of the pipe was layered in thick, greasy oil sludge. It was a huge task to continue fighting through the thick oil and moving forward with their injuries in utter darkness. The ordeal was draining. Somehow, after nearly 60 minutes of effort, they encountered another dreadful problem. The ocean water level was climbing. They were cleaving their heads above the water in the pipe. The first in line realized his head was now inches from the top of the pipe. It was a helplessly desperate situation. Some were too seriously wounded to continue moving for long. Chris Budram and Kazim Ali were both at the lead. The other members, Yusuf, Faisal, and Rishi, were following in that order. They decided that Chris and Kazim would try to hold their breath to attempt swimming ahead to locate another air cavity. They vowed to the others they would hustle their way out and return with assistance for everyone. The 2 of them then swam forward, battling fatigue, and miraculously located another bubble of air near the riser section of the conduit. Even better, they expressed shock of joy to see 2 of their scuba cylinders had been swept into this area. It was as if that's all they required to get to their safety. They almost consumed both cylinders of breathable air to move through the next section. But Kazim, weakened and hurt by his injury, couldn't move as fast as he should. They both decided it was best to allow Chris use the remaining oxygen left and try and escape to the end of the pipe to seek assistance for all. Chris strapped the tank across his chest and forced himself through the narrow 2.5 feet conduit. At the riser end of the pipe, he faltered, with thoughts flashing through his poor mind. He felt, what if this was berth 5, blocked by yet another barrier, and not berth 6 as they thought? He would have swam up to 60 feet and meet a sealed stopper. There will be no air, and his air cylinder was nearly spent. With a sweeping boldness, he said final prayer. He surged forward to make his way to the end. After more than 2 hours entombed beneath the surface, it was a great sigh of relief as Chris finally bursted into the oily end at berth 6. Drained and overwhelmed, he pounded on the steel and yelled to attract the ship team's attention. One of the rescuers miraculously reached him and threw him a climbing chain. Chris was weak but shocked to imagine he's out into the open. Before being rushed to the infirmary, he gasped that all the others were still alive inside cavities of air within the conduit, but that they were all hurt with different injuries. Until then, no member of the LMCS believed endurance was this possible or that anyone would still be alive. The presumption was that the pipeline was filled with crude and the divers had drowned within minutes. They also knew that oxygen tanks can usually only last for an hour, but this is over 2 hours since the deadly surge, and now, Chris's survival ignited hope. As Chris narrated the circumstance, divers promptly tapped on the conduit at multiple locations, receiving answering knocks from within. The trapped crew must have felt a surge of relief. Rescue was imminent. They knew that professional divers, along with different kind of rescue equipment, would be deployed: oxygen tanks, ropes, light, help. Many hours passed and they waited to see if help was coming, but they didn't have it. Salvation never arrived. Although aware they were alive, rescuers hesitated. Hours crawled by. The men lingered in torment, their wounds worsening, and were now struggling to breathe, the limited air becoming foul with carbon dioxide. Each hour increased the carbon dioxide content of their very limited airflow. They knocked, they shouted, they waited, but no diver ventured into the conduit. They attempted to move helplessly towards the exit. It was a devastating realization that no one was coming for them after days of being stuck in the crude oil pipe. The explanations remain bitterly disputed, and was a very cruel reality that these men were just few hundred feet from being given a chance to live again. But no one made effort to reach them. They struggled painfully on their own, knocked for attention, and made effort to get to the exit. It was a brutal reality that after days and many hours of being stuck in a greasy, oily pipe, no help could come to them. The actions taken by LMCS, Paria Fuel, the affiliate company, Heritage, and Coast Guard Trinidad was much debated. Some argued that Paria Fuel obstructed a rescue from getting to the dying men, fearing greater peril to more lives. Paria maintains there was no secure strategy that wouldn't have endangered more lives. Some even opined that the knocks was from something else and that the men were already dead. The Coast Guard, LMCS, and the families members, who were also professionals in diving, many being skilled divers themselves, all had different narratives of the entire event. What cannot be denied is this: the 4 men were still alive at 5 p.m. Friday, when Chris was saved. Numerous witnesses affirm they heard pounding knocks from inside the conduit for nearly 48 hours afterward before stopping. When the bodies were later recovered, 2 autopsies conducted later displayed slightly conflicting timelines of death. But both reports agreed on the fact that all 4 men appeared to have survived until various times on Saturday, others even until Monday. It is uncertain if the men perished from pains of their wounds, or suffocated due to lack of oxygen, or drowned while attempting an escape to the exit. But a commission of inquiry was convened in Trinidad and Tobago. Its conclusions are scheduled to be published in August 2023.
Because everything inside me open and rescue, you know? Everything inside me open and rescue was going on. Nobody was making an attempt to rescue me.
I'm trying to come up. General. Right behind you, man. Right behind you? You're right behind me? You don't know when you're trying to come up? It's not coming up. Who making all that noise? Come on, all that we let's figure it out. We gotta go. We gotta start moving. trying to come out. Who is that boy? Yusuf? Oh, Yusuf? How long you have to walk before you meet Faisy? You and Faisy was together all the time? Who else with you? Can't with you? Right there where? Can't everything alright with you? No. Any limbs break? Your leg, alright. Five. Anything happen to you? A five? No way. Yusuf, anything happen to you? Yeah, boy. What happened? Alright.
Thanks for watching. Click the popped video on your screen to watch some other most mind-blowing tragedies ever. They are real stories and life-touching events, not crafted. See you in our next one. Cheers.